Teachers, school workers of Reddit, what was the worst conference you ever had with a parent? Story 1. Copied from an earlier post, so forgive the slight diversion from the question here. I was relating an incident from over a decade ago when I was a long-term substitute teacher for someone who took maternity leave and then never came back. Most of the kids were good, but a few convinced me to find another career. This particular example happened early. After the 5th time I asked her to stop talking to her friends during class, I threatened to send her down to the office. She told me that if I did that, she'd tell everyone I tried to assault her. I told her she probably shouldn't have said that in front of 20 other witnesses and told her to get out of my class and go to the office. She flounced out in a huff. About an hour later, I had to stop teaching another class in order to answer an urgent summons from the principal. Apparently, Miss Chatterbox had called up her mother, who was now in the principal's office, and complaining about how she had to miss work because yet another evil teacher was hassling her daughter. She proceeded to ream me out for 10 minutes, complaining that I not only hated her daughter and had it in for her, but have hated her for months, had repeatedly made up stuff to get her daughter in trouble and, according to her daughter, had been ogling her like a creep all year. She demanded that the principal fire me and apologize to her daughter. I looked at the principal and said, "Do you want to tell her, or shall I?" The principal sighed and explained that I was a substitute teacher who had started yesterday and had only met the daughter this morning. This didn't slow Mom down for a second. She doubled down and demanded I be fired immediately nonetheless. The saddest part is that the principal had obviously been through this all before many, many times. Story 2. I have told this story in a similar thread, but it works for this one as well. My wife is an elementary school teacher and suspected that one of her students may be autistic. The kid wouldn't communicate well at all, had issues with using the bathroom, and showed other classic signs of autism. My wife had a conference with the mother and explained that she would like him to be evaluated, but the mother refused and said that if her son did have autism, my wife was the one who caused it. My wife has learned to handle those situations much differently now. Being accused of causing autism will do that. Story 3. Mine is a little different. No angry parents, just you. I was teaching grade 7 during my internship and was speaking to the parent of a high-needs student. Without going into too much detail, the girl we were speaking of had little to no long-term or working memory and limited ability to communicate needs and wants. Anyways, her mother was complaining to us about the bus driver and told us Anne had scabies last month and I don't think he even bothered cleaning her seat on the bus. My partner teacher and I just stared at each other for a second. The mother hadn't informed the school about the kid having scabies. We hadn't cleaned her desk, the couches, or anything else. And I let this kid hug me every day. I took like 6 showers that night. Story 4. I had a student this year who clearly has a learning disability. But he's a wonderful student, and the class and I adored him and celebrated the successes he had. This child, despite clearly needing accommodations, did not have an IEP or basically special education services for those not in the field. So, conferences roll around, and I bring up his academic struggles, second grader capable of barely kindergarten-level work, expecting them to fight me when I suggest that he needs special education testing. I mean, why else would this child who is clearly struggling not have an IEP if his parents are aware, not in denial? Nope, they totally agree and want him to get help. Okay, great. Let's talk background a bit. Oh, he was retained in 1st grade, and he only went to half of the 2nd year of 1st grade? Well, what was he doing the first half? Some story about Biomom not allowing him to go to school. Okay. What about Kinder? Oh, he only went to half of that too? Okay. Well, with absences like that, I don't know if they will test him, but I'll go to bat if you guys make a serious effort to have him here every day. They agree. Yay, we are on the same team. We are going to get this kid who totally deserves it some help, and he will not fall through the cracks on my watch. I call and email everyone I can until someone agrees to test him despite his lack of educational time. Really go above and beyond because I love this 8-year-old? Things go really well. He makes progress. He's there almost every day, then absences start happening. Parents show up too, 3 hours late to pick him up. Then he's gone for multiple days at a time. Vague nonsense excuses when I call. Then he's gone for 10 solid days. I call. Well, we just haven't felt like taking him to school. But I'll bring him Monday. Promise. He hasn't been back to class, so he's withdrawn from my class, and they haven't enrolled him anywhere else. Of course, we've sent truancy officers, but this is Las Vegas, and we are last in education for a reason. So yeah, that's my worst conference. They told me they would do their best for a kid I loved, and they lied to my face. Story 5. I had a mother come in on parent-teacher night with her daughter in tow. This isn't allowed, but a lot of parents do it. The girl is on an IEP, but I'd never had to offer her any accommodations or modifications. She was a terrific student with a 99 average. I told her mother as such and said I would also like to see the girl speak up more and not be afraid of her voice. She was always volunteering in class, but when she spoke, she did so in a whisper. She was confident in her knowledge, but not confident in letting people hear her. The mother said, "What can she improve?" I laughed, but the mom looked very serious, so I just said, "Honestly, nothing really. She has a 99 average. There's not much to improve on." The mother said, "I understand that, but what about everything else? How is her organization?" I replied that I didn't know of any problems with organization, seeing as she turned in all her homework on time and was obviously prepared for every test and quiz. Mom pressed me further to tell her something her daughter was doing poorly at, so I apologized for not having anything to add other than that her daughter was a model student. I gave the poor girl a wink as they left and hoped she'd find the humor in the situation. This doesn't sound like an awful conference experience. But the following week, the girl's performance tanked. She couldn't find her homework. She was suddenly scrambling to study in the moments before the bell rang, and she started second-guessing herself whenever she volunteered an answer to a question. It was like hearing her mom's assumptions that something was going poorly completely psyched her out. She would never be good enough. It sucked. Story 6. A decade ago, I had an 8th grade student who was in all remedial classes. Her life's ambition at the time was to be like the girls on Jersey Shore and to have a part on a reality show. I didn't have her for any academic classes, only a less than 30-minute homeroom. One day, I called her mother to try to get a form signed and returned, and I let her mother know that she had been in trouble in homeroom for some very loud, very sexually explicit talk that she wouldn't stop after being repeatedly warned. The mother went berserk. She demanded to know exactly what her daughter had said, and I was ready with some quotes. That morning, the kid had been going on and on about a super big dildo. The mother demanded a conference immediately, so I let the team leader know, and he scheduled one. The teachers who had the kid for academic classes were astounded. They had been trying to get the parent to come in or at least respond to anything all year, to no avail. The parent, before the conference, attempted to call me multiple times daily, leaving furious, accusatory messages about all the terrible lies I was telling, and that her daughter knew nothing about close relationship and had no idea what a dildo even was, and that I was a sick person. The day of the conference arrives, and the parent shows up red-faced and fairly vibrating with anger. The academic teachers start to speak to her about her child disrupting their classes, never completing assignments, etc., and she cuts them off. She announces that her child has some shocking news to disclose about me. I was about 6 or 7 months pregnant at this time. The child lifts her head and, with tears in her eyes, says that I had traumatized her, because I said that I hated my baby and wished I could just get rid of it, and that she couldn't even look at me without wanting to cry because of how awful I was. It was like a crazy scripted reveal moment from one of the reality shows the girl was obsessed with. It was utterly surreal. I cut her off. I told her that it was laughably transparent that she was trying to take the heat off of herself by making outrageous and irrelevant accusations, and that I was disgusted that her mother would fall for something so ridiculous. Then I told the parent to pipe down and listen to the academic teachers because her kid wouldn't make it out of 8th grade if something didn't change. I had the girl put into another homeroom on the spot, got my enormous self upright, and waddled the fudge out. Story 7. Had a student who was confirmed as being sexually abused by her stepfather. He was a convicted close relationship offender on parole who was living with the mother and 2 other children when he was found to be assaulting his stepdaughter and was immediately sent back to prison and charged with assault. The mother came into the yearly conference and immediately started complaining that her daughter's grades had slipped from all A's and B's to all C's, D's, and F's. She said her daughter was lazy and a liar. I wanted to jump across the table and punch her over and over again. The mother claimed to the police and again in court that her daughter made it all up. The daughter only came forward when she discovered that her stepfather had started assaulting her 9-year-old sister. She had kept quiet until then, because he threatened to assault the younger sister if the older daughter, aged 13, said anything. He started on her when she was 8. But the mother just kept harping on how her daughter was lazy and uncooperative. I've never wanted to harm another adult as much as I did this woman. Story 8. I was a first-year teacher and I have a very young face. When I go out with my sister, 5 years younger, I get carded and she doesn't. When you look like your students, You have to do whatever you can to maintain your position of authority in the class until you get well established in the school. So I try to dress in a very formal way to set myself apart from the students. When I went into my first parent-teacher conference, I was wearing a sweater that had a kind of fastener on the sleeves, and I had accidentally twisted it before I buttoned it. Not all that noticeable, but the mom I was conferencing with saw it. Before I could stop her, there was a rush of mothering and "Oh, here, honey, let me fix that." She had my sleeve unbuttoned and rebuttoned correctly before I could even back up. Her kid was behind her with his head in his hands. He was super embarrassed. And I looked like a little kid whose mom had to help her get dressed. Not my finest hour, but actually a pretty funny one looking back on it. Story 9. I have one for this. I'm a 7th and 8th grade teacher in Philadelphia. This young man's mom had gotten him identified as gifted. When I taught him, he was failing multiple classes, refused to do any work, slept through classes, and took no responsibility. She came into conference. All the teachers are in the same room and parents circulate. Ignored everyone except for 2 of us. Interrupted an ongoing conference the math teacher was having to berate him for being a race traitor and bringing down her son out of ignorance came over to me. I'm the English teacher, and when I stood up and extended my hand, she just looked at it. She then looked me in the eye and told me no. You're not even worth it. She turned around and started out of the room, cursing the staff to no one in particular. The Spanish teacher tried to talk to her and got cursed out, so the Spanish teacher called security to have her escorted out of the building. The mom then tried to use evasive maneuvers to avoid security, but was eventually caught and escorted out, told she was no longer welcome on our premises. She tried to sneak into the next conference, but was caught. Follow-up story. This was her middle child. Her oldest had already graduated from the school, K-8. And her youngest was in 3rd grade. When the youngest was in 5th grade, they went on a trip to Canada, and she followed, against direct instruction from administration, in her own car, showed up at the place they were having dinner, where there wasn't a seat for her. So she sat at her own table and ordered something for herself. She then tried to stay at the hotel where the kids were staying, and when there wasn't an extra room, tried to go in where her kid was. When that obviously didn't work out to her expectations, she took her kid and drove back home that night. So yeah, she sucked. Story 10. My mom is a teacher and told me about her worst parent-teacher conference. There was a kid who had developed major behavior problems, so she called the parents in for a conference. Only the mother showed up to the conference, which isn't all that uncommon. The mother apparently reeked of alcohol and cigarettes, and came in dressed in ratty old jeans and a top exposing her midriff. My mom sits the mother down and asks her if she was aware that the child hadn't been doing his homework and had been to the principal's office about 4 times in the past month for harassing other students. The mother of the student goes, "Yeah, I'm not too surprised by that. His dad walked out on us a while ago and they just found him in Florida." My mom, being an understanding lady, says she's sorry the father did that, and offers a list of resources: attorneys so she can sue for child support, women's shelters, food banks, and so on. The other mother laughed and said, "Oh no, we won't need any of that." They only found his arm, the rest was fed to the gators. My mom sat there in horror as the mother elaborated. Apparently the father owed a few people some money and had no intention of paying them back. So the people found him and fed him to the gators. The only reason they knew the arm was his is because his fingerprints were in the system for several domestic violence charges. She instructed my mother not to tell the student how the father passed away. As far as he knew, his dad passed away in an accident, not a homicide. The kid ended up all right in the end. He went on to graduate and get a job. To my mother's knowledge, he never found out the truth about his dad, but I really can't judge him for acting out in grade school. Story 11. I had a parent get mad at me because I failed her student on a project. She called a meeting with me and an assistant principal. We both tried in vain to explain that the project wasn't even due yet, that her child was right on track in terms of being prepared to turn everything in on time, and that her daughter was doing just fine. She then tried to complain that I was failing her daughter because her daughter thought I was mean and wouldn't come to morning tutorials because she was afraid of me. I told her it was impossible for me to fail her daughter for not coming to tutorials since they are in no way tied to grades, and furthermore, her daughter was not failing my class. She was making a low B, which is perfectly acceptable in a more rigorous pre-AP class. Most irrational person I ever met. She insisted on having her daughter transferred from my class. Edit to add, the family was not Asian, nor from another country. Just good old Marika crazy. Story 12. When I was a student teacher in a 4th grade classroom, we had 2 moms scheduled for back-to-back conferences, get into a fight just outside the classroom. My 7 months pregnant supervisor had to restrain one of the girls to prevent her from joining the fight while I frantically called the office. The other girl pulled her toddler sister around the corner at least. Eventually, some other staff heard the commotion and broke it up, and a police officer, who was at the school for unrelated reasons, got involved. The two moms were separated, and I ended up waiting in the classroom with the instigator mom and her daughter for the officer to finish interviewing her. Daughter was freaking out, sobbing that her mom was going to get arrested. Mom scolds daughter for crying, then turns to me and asks, "So, how's daughter doing in English?" Fortunately, we got interrupted before the mom tried to have the whole conference. The worst part of the whole situation. The fight was started because one of these 9-year-olds had been nasty to the other over Facebook. Story 13. In my second year of teaching theater for a middle school, I had a parent demand a conference with myself and our principal. She expressed that her son could no longer be in my theater class because all that stuff makes you boy, which for her would be the absolute worst thing that could happen. It was my first slap in the face that no matter what work you put in, that in the end of the day the parents will push and pull their kids in life for better or worse. Our principal was outraged by the parents' comments, but held the parents' decision with respect because really there's nothing we could do. Since this experience, I've planted the idea that the only obstacle that will prevent you from greatness is yourself, not your friends, family, teachers, etc. Ironically, the student joined the class because of the ratio of female to male students that set roughly 10:1. Thus, parents, if you have any concerns with your children about anything, talk to them before making assumptions. Perspective matters. Story 14. My last conference of the night, which was supposed to end at 8 p.m., went until almost 8:30 because the mom didn't understand why her son was receiving extra reading support. She didn't like it because he can do it at home. So the reading teacher and I were explaining what he does at his extra reading time, why he was placed there, etc. The reading teacher pointed out that he sometimes makes silly mistakes. For example, he told her his birthday is October 31st, then Mom informed us that his birthday is October 30th. He's in 3rd grade and doesn't know his birthday. Spent 45 minutes at the end of the night explaining why this kid needs extra help in school. Edit. His birthday is October 30th, not October 31st. Apparently, I also need an extra long conference. Story 15. I had a meeting where we asked a question to the mother about how she felt the student, who is on the spectrum, was doing at home and at school, emotionally. The mother immediately responded, "I don't care. I don't want to be here. I don't care about any of this. I'm grieving." They were sitting right next to her. The look on her face broke my heart. "This is so common, it makes me furious." Mother's second husband passed away several months ago. She dumps my student at her ex-husband's, wherever, and goes off with her new boyfriend. Student's father was also in the meeting and said nothing. Grandmother is the only one who actually tries to help my student. Story 16. Not me, but my sister, who was a teacher. She was telling me about this mom she had to deal with. Her mom would make her daughter drink juice out of a 32 ounces container and instructed my sister to give her 3 of these a day. This is a 6-year-old. The mother at the same time kept talking about how she's working with her daughter on her delayed toilet training. My sister tried to explain to this mom, to no avail, that the only reason she's having such difficulty making it to the bathroom on time is because you're making her drink nearly 100 Oz of fluids before the school day is even over. Many people won't get it. Story 17. Not formal conferences, but meetings. A few come to mind. 1. I was working in a kindergarten classroom, and a father had approached me and asked me if I let his son play in the kitchen center. I replied with something along the lines of, "Yes, we allow each of the children to freely explore what interests them," and explained why, but Dad was unhappy about it. He immediately asked me to stop this, as allowing his boy to pretend like he's cooking will make him boy. 2. Was teaching at a preschool, and a mother had approached me and a few other teachers as she was concerned about her 3-year-old son's behavior. She was asking all these questions about who he plays with, what he likes to play with, and so on. She then expressed concern that he had an undescended testicle, which will turn him into a homosexual. She wanted us to keep our eyes on his behavior and stop him from acting boy. 3. Recently, I had a conference with a family regarding one of my current students who will be attending kindergarten next year. I expressed all of my concerns, and this child has many concerns. Cognitive delays, speech concerns, a few minor behavior concerns, and asked Mom her thoughts and concerns. She had none. Absolutely none. In fact, her child is perfectly equipped to handle kindergarten next year and will not struggle one bit. Never mind the fact that he can't count higher than 3 and doesn't understand the difference between letters and numbers, despite having daily exposure for 2 years now. Story 18. When I was student teaching, my mentor teacher was accused of failing a girl because she was black. The girl herself never said anything about it, but her parents sure did. When it came time for a conference, everyone was there. The girl, her parents, the principal, a counselor, my mentor, and me. My mentor let the parents have their say, explain their reasoning, there wasn't much, and continue to accuse her of being racist. Once it was her turn to reply, my mentor reached into her bag and pulled out a family portrait. It was of herself, her black husband, and their biracial daughter. She just set it on the table, and the girl's parents immediately stood up and left. I haven't seen anything like it, or as hilarious since. Story 19. TBH, my 4th grade teacher had a terrible conference with my mom and another kid's parents. That kid had been verbally harassing me with explicit close relationship comments, essentially telling me he was going close relationship with me, that he liked my butt and ball. I was overweight. I did not develop early. It was incredibly degrading, and other students heard him say it and actually reported it before I did. Even the girl who bullied me told on him because she thought it was gross. So my mom had the meeting, and she told me that his parents were both very dismissive and very stupid. They didn't understand the gravity of the situation. He was put into another classroom, despite my mom requesting that he be put into the special ed program, where he actually needed to be because they served both children with disabilities and children with behavioral issues. He fixated on another girl and actually touched her. He was expelled. Story 20. My story is a little different. Back in the day, I taught high school. I had one 10th grader who was being really disruptive in class and not doing any work, which sadly was typical of the students of the school I worked at, so we arranged to have a meeting with me, the kid, the counselor, and his mom. This kid was dabbling in gangs. I'd get my desk and books tagged up with his cruise tags, had gotten stopped by cops a few times already for petty theft, and would only show up rarely to school, but when he did show up, he was a complete tool. Anyway, we met in the counselor's office. He only had 2 seats, so I stood in the back, also to block the doorway to prevent him from walking out on us. We started talking about how much of a jerk this kid was being in class, and what sorts of interventions we should put in place to help set him straight. His mom starts to quietly cry. The counselor gently hands her a tissue while the kid just laughed and told her to stop crying. That's probably the closest I ever got to punching a kid in the face. Story 21. A teacher friend had a girl plagiarize a large section of a 5-page report for class. The best part is that she allowed 5 other people to copy and paste her report, word for word. They only changed the names. Not only did each parent insist that their child was the original writer of the paper, they tried to ignore the obvious plagiarism and tried to take it up with the principal. Principal basically said, "Your kids are idiots and get zeros." These were all gifted students. One was the child of a counselor in the school, another a child of a teacher, and another the child of a principal. Story 22. I'm a high school history teacher. One of my courses was comparative religions and philosophies. I essentially taught every major world religion and political ideology. I'm an open atheist, but I teach the course with objectivity, and I teach with respect because I have students across all religious backgrounds. I never insult, condemn, or offend, and I encourage my students to keep an open mind as well. I had a parent contact me for a conference about 3 weeks into the first term. Her son was a freshman, his freshman U.S. I class immediately followed my senior-level religions course. One day when he was coming into class, he overheard me discussing the 3 Abrahamic prophets, Moses, Jesus, Abraham, with a senior. Apparently, he went home and told his mother I called Abraham a prophet. They're evangelical Christians. This apparently infuriated her enough that she had to call me to arrange a meeting ASAP. She came into the meeting and immediately started insulting me, questioning my intelligence/training/qualifications. I have multiple degrees, so nah girl, and hilariously, calling me a heretic for suggesting Abraham and Moses were in the same category as Jesus. I called the principal into the conference as a witness to both the lesson itself, I was being observed, and as a witness to the meeting. She railed into him, too, asking how he could possibly think it was all right to allow me to teach such anti-Jesus heresy in his school. His response? Well, I'm Jewish, so there's that. It took everything in me not to pour out the water myself from laughing. I never had a problem with her again. Story 23. I had a parent request a conference after I had given their kid a demerit for telling a special needs kid in class to fudge off. The father and mother are both there, and the father looks me dead in the eye and tells me I made it up, and I have no proof and demanded I retract the demerit. When I told him no, he stormed out. The mother quickly apologized and proceeded to tell me how their son has Asperger's, but her husband doesn't believe autism is real, and she's been taking him to a psychiatrist behind his back, as well as medicating him. She then proceeds to beg me not to tell her husband because it will ruin their marriage. All I could do was stutter. So I am an art teacher. A little beyond my jurisdiction there, woman. Story 24. Other way around. Went to my kid's parent-teacher night, and the science teacher, who was a long-term sub, spent several minutes in a defensive monologue about how he's really supposed to be a social studies teacher, and the kids who tell him that he's not teaching anything are just spoiled and don't want to do the quizzes he photocopied out of the textbook. And he went on about how if kids don't want to learn, he won't bother with them. Turns out, he was sitting at the teacher's desk going through the textbook, and the 6 or so kids who wanted to learn science would stand around his desk and lean in so they could hear each other, while the rest of the kids just hung out and messed around. My kid never said anything, but she had been standing in front of his desk every science class for 2 months while they went through the textbook together, trying to ignore the mayhem around her. Edit. I wrote and deleted several emails to the principal until I was able to send one without the F word in it. They now have a full-time science teacher, but my kid is worried that she's going to be behind for standardized tests and for next year. Story 25. Not me, but an English teacher I had. He said that in his first year of teaching in this school, there was a class he was teaching with a girl who tried her hardest to write well. She met with him many times after class to look over her essays, and she gradually improved. She got a B first semester. During the conferences, the girl's father and mother came. My teacher said how the girl tries very hard and she's improving. The father asked my teacher, "Why is my daughter so stupid?" My teacher replied, "Well, maybe it's genetic." Cue the wife stifling her laughter, and my teacher afraid of losing his job. Story 26. When I was a section leader in my high school band, I was included in a parent-teacher meeting with another student's mother, not my own. Essentially what happened was there were 3 trumpet parts for the songs we were playing. The band director assigned the lead parts, mostly to seniors and a couple juniors with strong playing ability. He put the section leaders, myself included, in charge of assigning the second and third parts, took volunteers to play third part first. Some people wanted to because they were on their secondary instrument, and assigned the rest based on seniority. Admittedly, maybe this wasn't the best system, but I had played third part my freshman year, so it didn't seem like a big deal. We also had to start sectionals and didn't have time for a formal audition process. Anyway, I get a personal phone call from a particular freshman's mom. They weren't supposed to give out my number at all. They only had it for scheduling reasons. A couple days later, she asks if she can talk to me about part assignments, and I tell her that she'll have to speak with my band director. Policy so student leaders don't get harassed by parents. So she sets up a meeting and the director asks me to be in it. She spent 20 minutes laying into us about how her kid was the most talented trumpet player and doesn't deserve to be on low parts, and he should be playing lead. Wouldn't listen to us when we told her that he would have plenty of opportunities to play lead later, and that the current lead players all started on low parts. She put all the blame on me, basically. The best part was when she lost it and stormed out because I told her that her son was not to give out my personal phone number to anyone, and that I would no longer be answering her calls to my phone. Story 27. I haven't taught in 15 years, but my first year as a high school world history, 10th grade, and American history, 11th grade teacher was a doozy. It also pretty much drove me out of teaching. I had the mother of one of my American history students come in for a parent-teacher conference to complain about her son failing my class. He was a senior and repeating American history in order to have enough credits to graduate. And according to this mother, I should be nice and just give her son a passing grade. The problem was that the kid never turned in homework, slept in class, refused to do quizzes, and ignored tests. I think he had a 1% and only because he turned in a single assignment. Mom said it was because he had a full-time job and worked from 4 p.m. until midnight as a vet's assistant in order to help support the family. Mom, Dad, 5 kids. Mom was a stay-at-home, but all the kids were in school. Now I took pity on the kid. I understand in a rural community that family is the most important thing impressed upon them from an early age. But as a teacher, it was my job to teach, not give students a pass because things were tough. It also wasn't as if my requirements were incredibly high or tough. There were generally 20 homework assignments per quarter, about 2, 3 a week, maybe 8 quizzes, and 2, 3 tests. I generally reviewed everything on the tests, and the quizzes covered the reading material from the night before. Mr. Scholastic would walk in the door, sit in his chair, and then immediately go to sleep. I tried for weeks to keep him awake, but the moment I turned my head, he was in slumberland. I had 30 other students that needed my attention, so I just wrote him off. So his mom is making all these excuses as to why I had to give her son a passing grade. I'm quiet. When she finally stops for air, I decided on a course of action. Here's what I'll do. I can give your son a passing grade, but that diminishes the work of my other students. As the teacher, how I grade students is left to my discretion. Clearly, your son isn't meeting the academic requirements for a passing grade in my class, but again, my discretion. Considering that your son works as a vet tech to support the family, and that bringing money home is more important than his schooling, I just have one question to ask. When you fill out your son's taxes, what do you put down as his occupation? Student, Mom answers without missing a beat. I smile. And that's why your son will not be getting a passing grade. Best of luck next year. Had she answered vet tech or vet assistant, I would have gone ahead and given the son a D. Needless to say, the mom had nothing good to say about me up a storm to the administration. Story 28. I have kind of an opposite story. My mom's worst experience in a parent-teacher conference. I was in a math class in elementary school, and I had gotten a B. My mom was upset by this because I'm usually a straight A student, but also because I was good in math. Also note that she's pretty hard on me school-wise, which is why she cared enough to do all of the following. She checked my tests and saw that I had gotten all A's on my tests and 1 B. She proceeded to have numerous conferences with the teacher and the principal did not understand the concept of averaging grades and claimed that if a student got 1 B, then that was their permanent grade despite all of the other tests they'd taken. My mom asked the principal if students should just stop trying after receiving a B, and the principal said, no, they should still try. To her credit, the teacher didn't understand why they didn't average grades, but it was a school-wide policy. After a few months and after going to the superintendent, my mom got the policy changed. My mom said the principal still didn't quite understand why grades should be averaged, or, if she did, it had taken her a few months to understand. Story 29. I was teaching psychology at a private high school in Shanghai. One of my students had the reputation of being the local cola worker. Always came into class with bloodshot eyes and clothes from the night before. She's pulling straight F's due to missing classes. She has intelligence, but she just isn't there half the time. Then I hear rumors that this girl, 16 going on 17, was practically living with a 30-year-old with a bad reputation. I figured I should make a few calls. I wanted a conference with her parents. The mother was living with the pool boy, and the father was dodging my emails. After a month of sending emails and notes home to her dad, I get a sit-down during the parent-teacher conferences. The first words out of his mouth were, "Normally I don't bother with small stuff like this, but you just wouldn't leave me alone." That explained everything. Edit. The final straw was when she offered to fillet me for a passing grade. So no, I wasn't just being nosy. She was later expelled for selling some cola on the school grounds. The police didn't get involved because her dad made a generous donation to the school. Read principal. Edit 2. Her dad offered me a few $1,000s to just let her through in front of the other parents at the conference after I showed him his daughter's grades. Real class act. Story 30. Had a parent come into our preschool class and tell us that she was very upset, that she wanted to talk to us about something that was happening to her 3-year-old on the school bus. Of course, we kind of panicked, thinking that something bad had been going on. Turns out the aide on the bus, the little old grandmother who was there to buckle the kids in and monitor them as they drove, had been playing with the toddler. She, like any grandmother, would give her a tickle under the armpits. This mother was very upset and said that no child, no matter how young or old, should be tickled because tickling was wrong. She refused to put her back on the bus for a long time, even after I had a talk with the aide, who was absolutely mortified and apologized profusely. She's the sweetest lady, and she meant no harm, but it nearly got her in huge trouble. Story 31. I've been at my current school since it opened 5 years ago. Long story short, when the school opened, we only had about 6 or so weeks to get our act together, and, as a result, admitted some students we were not equipped to handle. I was a special education teacher at the time and had a young man on my caseload who had a dual diagnosis of autism and emotional disturbance, technically not possible under IDEA, but the kid came from a notoriously shady district. The boy had previously attended an alternative placement where, from what inferred, he'd spent most of his time being placated on the computer. None of his social-emotional goals were being addressed, and his academics had clearly fallen by the wayside. Very quickly, his behaviors occupied so much of my time I could get not other responsibilities done. I think my personal favorite time was when he ripped the electrical outlet covers off the sockets, then threw them at the guidance counselor and I, while screaming that we were both fat bastards. Given that we'd only been open a short amount of time and our resources were extremely limited, to this day I still feel my co-workers and I did our best to help the child. However, his mother was a two-faced liar, and I got the impression she was into some shady cow. The kid was a piece of work, but I can't place too much blame on a 10-year-old when he was clearly a product of his environment. Flash forward 3-ish months. The boy was suspended for bringing a weapon, think it was a pocket knife, to school, and we brought him and his mother in for a reinstatement meeting. We principal and I had also drafted papers requesting a reevaluation since it was pretty obvious his prior evil IEP did not reflect his actual needs. Mom spent the whole meeting flipping the F out, saying down she was done with our cow, tired of getting phone calls, etc. Meanwhile, the boy was kicking my shins under the conference table as I tried not to react. Keep in mind that this was in the front office during morning drop-off, so the entire school community is witnessing this tirade. Seriously, later that day, kids I'd never met before asked if I was okay. The mother is pounding the table, getting in the principal's in my face when, wham! Out of nowhere, our school secretary comes out and basically body checks this woman. The secretary then dragged her from the building, screaming, "You need to leave now!" The son follows suit and he and Mom drive off. We called the police. I had to give a statement, and I spent the next 10 days in fear that he and his mother would return to school before we could officially drop him from our roster. Story 32. I teach kindergarten. I have 3 students that deserve to be held back this year. Kid Hash 1, the first conference his dad came. I explained to the dad how the son, though occasionally showing that he's capable, has several behavior problems that are having a negative impact on him academically. Mainly he doesn't pay attention because he's too busy trying to bother other kids and doesn't like being told what to do. He hit me the second day of school for telling him he can't scream in the hallway. The dad laughed. The next report card, he gets far below standard in every area. Mom comes in crying. I explain what's been going on in class. She apologizes. I ask if she wants to have a meeting about possible next steps, and she says no thanks. A week later, they go meet with my AP and ask to have their son held back, making me look like an idiot because I didn't recommend for that, because they refused to have a conference with me to discuss that option. The second kid is the child of a teen mom. Mom missed every formal parent-teacher conference. The kid is barely functioning at a toddler level academically. I finally got Mom to come in for one meeting. I showed her the kid's work compared to an average child's work. Mom said the only issue is that the kid needs speech therapy. I told her the process to get her kid evaluated for speech therapy, and she still hasn't followed through. That conference was just infuriating because the mom is failing the kid, who clearly belongs in special ed. Third kid is the youngest of 4. The older brother translates for the mom. I explain how the kid does no homework, and what little he does do is always wrong. He also doesn't do any work in class without me sitting with him, which is impossible to maintain in a class of 25 kids. The brother starts telling me everything I need to do to make sure the kid does his homework. I politely pointed out that I'm not at home with him, and I'm not his parent, but it was obvious why the kid was showing no progress after that meeting. Story 33. This will be buried, but I have 3. One 6th grade boy, total pain in the peach troublemaker. He was hateful, naughty, and mean. He was loud, rude, and also very small for his age. At one point of the year, right after Christmas, he was really acting like a complete and total peach bag in class, so it was time for a conference. I was expecting his grandmother because that's who he lived with, but nope. Here comes Mama. Mama had just gotten out of jail after 3 YRs. This is why he's being extra pain in the assy. She proceeds to tell me in front of him that he was the worst mistake she ever made, and if she could have afforded an abortion, she would have. The poor kid, the poor kid. His face was the epitome of dejection. I immediately turned the conference around and stopped talking about his behavior and started talking about his good qualities. I felt so badly for him. Second, 7th grade English class. Smart kid, but a real unpleasant person. He was the kind of kid who made fun of other kids when they made a mistake. He would call them stupid, out in class if they answered wrong, and make them feel really low. He was also that weird kind of kid who does strange things just to weird other kids out. Like violently snapping a pencil and then jabbing the pieces at the other kids, spitting a loogie on the carpet, pretending to be deaf, etc. One day in my class, he bit another kid. Yes, 7th grade. So there was a conference. The kid sat in his mother's lap. They were nearly the same size. It was so awkward, and grinned at me the whole conference. I'd say something and she'd defend him. It was sick. His eyes were sparkling, and he knew he was never going to get in trouble. The smug look on his face was unreal. He was looking at me, and his eyes were saying, "You're never gonna win, lady." Been doing this for years. Would not surprise me to find out he is, or something like that now. 3rd, 5th grade. This was in 2003, so little 5th grade African-American boys were super into having long hair so they could have braids. All the cool kids in my class had braids. This one little dip cow hadn't been doing his homework. He was failing BC, he was A, stupid, and B, did no work at all. Of course, the end of the year is coming, and it's found out that he is in trouble. And so finally his parents decide to take action. I get to school one morning early, and there is this gigantic man waiting outside my classroom door with this little boy. He gets right up in my face and starts telling me that I am trying to fail his son on purpose. What? Why? I ask him to explain. He tells me that his son told him that I taped his locker shut, and that's why he never brought any books home. I had to sit there, stare the man in the eyes, ask him that sounded logical or true. He finally realizes how insane that sounds, and I show him his son's locker. It is a pigsty, and all the books are under piles of trash in the locker. Father apologizes to me and leaves with his son. 40 miles later, school starts. In walks this kid with a bald head. His dad went home and shaved his precious braids off for lying. I was floored. It was awesome. That kid gave me 0 cow for the rest of the year. He also started doing his work. Too bad it took so long. Story 34. After-school program leader read babysitter. Had a group of 3 RD/4th graders, about 15. First day on the job, it's time to do homework. All the kids are doing it except one kid. He decides to walk around bugging all the other kids, playing around, etc. I tell him 3 times to sit down and do homework. I don't mind if you talk to your friends as long as it's getting done. In fact, I had to tell a couple other kids the same thing, but they listened. I was told during training parents get angry if homework wasn't done. Finally, I move him to a desk near me at the front and facing away from everyone else. He still is fidgeting, but gets some of it done. Next day, when his whale of a mother comes to pick him up, she wants to talk to me. My son tells me you're picking on him. No, I asked a few students, including him, to stop talking so they can get their homework done. The other kids did, he didn't. After the 3rd time, I sat him up near me to lessen the distractions. No, he said you were picking on him, and that's why he couldn't get his homework done. Why would he lie to me? Because he's a 3rd grade little cow who would say anything nit to get into trouble. They moved him to another group where he had the same issues, although I didn't see her talk to any more leaders. Edit. Swipe text sucks. Story 35. Student wrote me a vaguely threatening note, ending it literally with, "Or else you'll be the one learning a lesson." It definitely made little sense other than I am a brown female, and he just didn't want me to teach him. Which was fine because I wanted him out of my class. Mother came in and demanded a meeting with me and the head of my department. Had to give up my planning time to meet with her and her husband. During this meeting, she was almost foaming at the mouth with she must have done something because my poor, innocent baby would never threaten someone. Even after reading the note, she felt like I was being vindictive and questioned the department chair, insinuating that I was making it all up. Distinctly remember her pointing her finger at me and me telling her to put her finger down. Arab ladies are very entitled, and me being brown was obviously a crime in itself, and she couldn't understand why the presumably Arab department chair wasn't telling me off or putting me down and taking her side. He's my husband, so ... IT was satisfying when he informed her. But yeah, I hate that lady. Story 36. I teach pre-K. About 4 years ago, I was called into my principal's office. There was a parent requesting a conference because he had some concerns about the material I was teaching his daughter. Imagine my surprise when the parent began talking about witchcraft. Over the next 45 minutes, with a brief pause for the school psychologist, a school police officer, and the school social worker to arrive, I was accused of being a witch, dancing on their roof, hiding behind the curtains in their living room, pinching their infant daughter, teaching the other daughter how to make the mark of the beast. It's the OK hand symbol, in case you were wondering, as index finger and thumb create the bottom of the 6 and the remaining fingers are the curve, as well as being a tool of the Illuminati. The silence in the room once he left the principal's office was deafening. No one stopped him when he loudly announced his decision to homeschool because we were just tools in the hands of the Illuminati-controlled government. Story 37. My husband went to our son's parent-teacher interview for kindergarten. The teacher proceeds to tell him that he's doing great, however seems distant from group activities. She tells my husband how our son just says, "I need to be alone," then quietly takes a reading, play break in the corner. My husband doesn't think anything of this as our son hates group work, so they decide to make a plan and suggestions on how to get him more involved. The teacher starts asking about other strong female role models my son has in his life, aunts, grandmas that could come for Mother's Day tea so he isn't left out. My husband just paused and looked at her confused. Her reply, "Well, since your wife passed away, that little bugger told his teacher I had passed away so he could get out of group singing and craft time."